In January 1959, a group of 10 experienced skiers, mostly students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a challenging expedition through the Ural Mountains in the former Soviet Union. Led by the charismatic Igor Dyatlov, their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, whose name in the local Mansi language ironically means "don't go there." After one member, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back due to joint pain, a decision that would ultimately save his life, the other 9 continued into the unknown. What was meant to be a journey of achievement and camaraderie turned into a scene of inexplicable horror that, decades later, continues to defy the logic of forensic medicine and official Russian government explanations. The group's silence began to raise concern weeks after their scheduled return date. When search teams finally located the camp on the slope of Mount Kolatsyakl, or Mountain of the Dead, they found a disturbing sight. The group's tent was partially buried in snow, but the strangest detail was that it had been cut open from the inside. The skiers' belongings, including heavy clothing, boots and supplies, were all still inside. Outside the tent, footprints left by people who were barefoot or wearing only socks led toward a nearby forest, suggesting the group had fled in a state of frantic panic, without even taking the time to dress against the 30-degree Celsius deadly cold. The first 5 bodies were found in the following days, scattered between the tent and the edge of the forest. 2 of them were under a large cedar tree, wearing only underwear with their hands scraped raw, as if they had desperately tried to climb the tree. Igor Dyatlov and 2 others were found in positions suggesting they were trying to crawl back to the tent before succumbing to hypothermia. Up to this point, the explanation seemed to be a tragic but understandable outcome caused by a lapse in judgment under extreme conditions. However, the discovery of the last 4 bodies months later, when the snow melted, turned the case into an insoluble and terrifying mystery. These last 4 skiers were found in a deeper ravine in the forest, and their bodies showed injuries that defied any natural explanation. One had his skull fractured with brutal force, while 2 others had major chest fractures comparable to the impact of a high-speed car crash. Most bizarrely, despite the massive internal fractures, the bodies had no visible external wounds, as if they had been crushed by an invisible pressure. To complete the nightmare scenario, one of the women in the group, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, eyes and part of her facial tissues. The Soviet investigation at the time was closed quickly with a vague and frustrating conclusion. The deaths were caused by an unknown, compelling force. This verdict fueled decades of conspiracy theories. The presence of abnormal radiation levels on the clothes of some victims and reports from other expeditions of glowing orange spheres floating in the sky that night led many to believe the Dyatlov group had accidentally witnessed secret military tests, possibly of parapsychological weapons or experimental missiles, and that their deaths were a cover-up operation or a technological side effect. Another popular theory involves local folklore and the presence of the Menk, the Russian Yeti. The Kolatsyakl region has always been surrounded by legends about creatures guarding the mountain. The force required to crush a man's ribs without breaking his skin could, theoretically, be applied by a creature of immense strength. Photos recovered from the group's cameras show dark figures among the trees, which supernatural enthusiasts point to as evidence of a pursuit. However, skeptics argue that the absence of tongues and eyes is a common phenomenon of decomposition and the action of small scavengers after death. Recently, science has offered a fascinating explanation based on the phenomenon of infrasound. Strong winds blowing over the mountain's dome can create a type of vortex that generates sound waves so low in frequency they are inaudible but capable of inducing nausea, dizziness, and, above all, overwhelming psychological terror. This theory suggests the skiers were gripped by an environment-induced panic attack, explaining why they fled the tent so haphazardly and desperately, even without clothes. Once outside in the extreme cold, disorientation and hypothermia would have done the rest, leading to fatal decisions. In 2020, a new Russian investigation concluded that a small but powerful slab avalanche was the original cause. According to this theory, the skiers heard the roar of moving snow and, fearing being buried alive, cut open the tent and fled. The severe injuries would be the result of snow pressure on their bodies as they slept, or from falling into the rocky ravine during their flight in the darkness. While this explanation is technically plausible and has been simulated by Hollywood animators, interestingly the same ones who worked on the movie Frozen, it still does not satisfy all critics, who point to the gentle slope of the terrain as insufficient for such an avalanche. The most human and tragic aspect of the incident is the fate of Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor. He spent the rest of his life trying to understand what happened to his friends, often stating that, "If I had one question to ask God, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night?" The fact that he had to identify the clothes and remains of his companions scarred him forever. The Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a cold file of autopsies, it is the story of 9 young lives full of potential cut short in one of the most isolated places on the planet. The photos found in the group's film rolls are windows into a past that seems normal until the very last seconds. They appear smiling, setting up camp, and playing in the snow. The last photo taken, a blurry image of lights and shadows, is often interpreted as the exact moment the horror began. This abrupt transition from normalcy to absolute chaos is what makes the case so persistent. It reminds us that the boundary between the safety of civilization and the fury of the unknown is frighteningly thin, especially when we are at the mercy of the elements. The Dyatlov mystery also touches on the issue of government censorship. During the Cold War, any anomaly in Soviet territory was treated as a state secret. The fact that the files were sealed for decades only increased public distrust. When they were finally opened, the lack of photos from the original scene and gaps in medical reports suggested to many that evidence had been manipulated to protect state secrets. Mount Kolatsiakhl thus became a monument to bureaucratic silence and the resilience of an enigma that refuses to be buried. Today, the Dyatlov Pass is a place of pilgrimage for adventurers and paranormal investigators. The Russian government renamed the pass in honor of Igor Dyatlov, but the name has not brought peace to the area. Reports of electronic equipment failing and a persistent feeling of oppression continue to emerge from those who venture to those coordinates. The mountain seems to have retained the energy of that fateful night, serving as a reminder that there are phenomena, be they meteorological, military, or beyond, that current science still cannot catalogue with total certainty. When analyzing all the pieces, the cut tent, the radioactive clothes, the internal injuries, and the barefoot panic, we realize that no single theory explains all the facts. It is like a puzzle where the pieces belong to different games. If it was an avalanche, why the radiation? If it was the army, why leave the bodies? If it was supernatural, why were the laws of physics applied with such internal brutality? The Dyatlov Pass incident remains on the threshold between what we know and what we fear, a constant warning that nature and history hold secrets that can be fatal to those who try to uncover them. The legacy of Dyatlov is the relentless search for truth amidst the fog of uncertainty. 9 young people entered the forest and became part of one of the darkest legends of the modern era. As long as there is snow on the Ural Mountains, the question of what made them run to their deaths will continue to echo in the icy winds of Russia. If you also feel the chill of facing the inexplicable and wish to uncover the most disturbing files of our history, subscribe and join us. The next mystery may be hidden just there, behind the next mountain.